I wanted to ask you, Caleb, for innovationism, for those that don't know about it, you already sort of gave a brief introduction. Could you describe the theory and praxis that drives innovationism?
Okay, well, the main thing is that, if you read Marx, right, Marx refers to human beings as being an animal because that was the way people talked. And Marx, had correspondence with Charles Darwin, and they were rejecting any form of spirituality. They were hard materialists. Man was just another animal. But there's a very important essay that Frederick Engels wrote called The Role of Labor in the Transition from Ape to Man. And in that essay, Frederick Engels points out that human beings are unlike any other species because all other species simply interact with their environment, but human beings master their environment and force the environment to serve them, and that human labor power is about mastering the environment. And the whole history of human civilization, we have been reinventing our relationship with nature constantly in order to have a longer life expectancy, in order to increase our population, in order to have a more comfortable life. And we are constantly reinventing our relationship with nature. We're constantly innovating. And Marx touches on this. And his understanding of historical materialism is like, first you have hunter-gatherer civilization, eventually you have slavery, eventually you have feudalism, and then feudalism gives rise to industrial capitalism, which gives rise to imperialism, eventually socialism and communism. So he's understanding that that's the nature of humanity. But his focus is on the struggle between the industrial factory worker and the industrial factory owner. Well, nowadays, we live in a world where artificial intelligence is very rapidly eliminating human labor, right? Human labor has less and less of a role at the assembly line. Workers are more and more alienated from each other. Meanwhile, what Marx wrote about the contradiction between, what really, and this is the essence of what Marx wrote about. If you read, Capital, if you read The Poverty of Philosophy, he was talking about capitalism is the only system in history that has created poverty caused by abundance, right? Never before have people been homeless because there are too many houses. Never before have people been hungry because there's too much food. Capitalism creates a situation where the more wealth that is created, the poorer people get. And great technological advances make the problem worse because, like, self-driving cars should be a great thing. It should be great to have self-driving cars. But in our society, it would lead to millions of unemployed truck drivers, millions of unemployed Uber drivers, millions of unemployed state highway patrolmen and traffic court employees. And what sense does that make? It should be great that there's less human labor that's necessary because this chore called driving, is no longer necessary. And so abundance creating poverty, that is the essential contradiction of capitalism, that human brilliance, eliminating labor, making human labor more productive because machines can do so much and we have to do so little, that should lead to vast abundance. And that ultimately points toward the necessity of creating a rationally organized economy so that human creativity can continue to soar forward and we can become wealthier as technology advances. And that's at the essence of what Marx wrote, but in his time, it had not fully developed to the point that it has developed now. Marx was talking about the struggle of the factory worker against the factory owner, but he was pointing to something that was even deeper than that, which is that contradiction between human creativity, etc., and how ultimately the necessity of the capitalist economic system and the drive for technology is going to be a rationally organized economy. That's the ultimate conclusion. Now, Nelson Peary, who was the leader of the Communist Labor Party and eventually formed the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, he wrote a very, very good book before he died, which I really recommend to people. It's called The Future is Up to Us. And in this book, he points out that the worker and the factory owner, they're both part of capitalism. But the merchant class that overthrew feudalism, they were neither slaves or serfs or landowners. And they were a new class that had been created by the rise of a new mode of production of capitalism. And that, the landowners that overthrew hunter-gatherer civilization, they were not part of hunter-gatherer civilization. They had land. They were a separate new class that had been created for a new mode of production. And what he argues is that it's not, the working class is an essential part of capitalism, the wage worker. It's not a class within the system that overthrows it. It is a new class created by a new mode of production. And what Nelson Peary argues is that capitalism, through the computer revolution, through artificial intelligence, is creating what he calls the new class of almost permanently unemployed workers that are almost like gig economy workers who are struggling every day to survive and are kind of small business owners. You know, they work, they set their own hours, and they kind of have to use their creativity and their innovation to figure out how they can hustle as much money from Uber or from Amazon or whoever in order to get by. That new class that has been created that really doesn't have a place in capitalism is kind of fighting every day to just have enough. They're not lumpen. They're not criminal elements that are leeching off their own class. They're like fighting to just get enough to survive as they've kind of been cast out of the means of production. That new class, the precariat is what other people have come to call it. That new class will lay the basis for a new economy when society controls the means of production. And I've pointed to the rise of Javier Milei in Argentina. Awful leader. He has been awful for Argentina, but why did he win? He won because the left, the socialist movement in Argentina, the labor unions, the communist groups are very much tied in with the Peronist bureaucracy. And that Peronist bureaucracy crushes gig economy workers, right? They get treated as small business owners. Their taxes are what they would pay if they were a small business owner. They don't get union representation. And gig economy workers in Argentina have been royally screwed by the Peronist bureaucracy. If they were factory workers, they would benefit from the Peronist bureaucracy. But because they're gig economy workers, they have been totally screwed. And so libertarianism is much more attractive to them, right? I believe Javier Milei has gotten rid of a lot of the licenses that they have to pay, has lifted a lot of the taxes on them. And so the libertarian philosophy very much appeals to the precariat because the bureaucracy is intended to protect factory workers. And that Marxism and socialism was always intended to be a labor union adjacent movement. That's how Marx designed it. Social democracy originally, communism, Bolshevism was like the anti-imperialist wing of the labor movement, but it was always designed to be there are workers in this factory that are organized into this union to demand better conditions, and this is the ideology of the labor union. This is the ideology and the political vision that accompanies the labor movement. We're in a period where the labor movement, it's still a factor, but it's very different. And so we have to kind of rethink things. And that's why innovationism is a celebration of human creativity, an understanding that we need a rationally organized economy, and that the computer revolution has created a deep crisis of overproduction. And that ultimately, I have raised the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families, right? We need a state that controls the economy in order to make sure there is growth. But there's going to be a lot of capitalists in that state. And if you look at any 21st century socialist society, all the actual communist governments have realized in order to have communism or socialism in our time, you need small business owners. And in fact, in Nicaragua, micro entrepreneurship is a big part. That's the success. The government loans money to Nicaraguans to start their own farm, to start their own business. And that's how it's flourished. In China, it's the same thing. And in Vietnam, it's the same thing. And North Korea would like to do that. It's just very difficult because of all the sanctions. Right? Capitalism is an essential part of 21st century socialism. It's just controlled. It's not capitalism in the sense that profits are in command, but having a market sector and having innovators, people that are entrepreneurs with new ideas that go out and invent things, having consumers vote with their dollars on things. That's a part of the 21st century pro-growth state-planned economies that are emerging, right? So by calling us innovationists, we're making clear we are not anti-growth. We're not opposed to creativity. We're not trying to, impose some kind of bureaucracy on working people. We want a state that controls the major centers of economic power to enable people to go out and innovate and be creative and build a new, beautiful world with their minds and with their creative power, right? It's a different kind of relationship. We need a state that is actively investing in the population and sees human labor power as the source of all wealth and human creativity as something that needs to be nurtured and promoted at all costs.